Okay. So we are on Samach Tet Aleph, about halfway down the page. Alive after it was slaughtered. So if the animal is inside its mother when the mother was slaughtered, the animal is said to be slaughtered already, according to at least one opinion, as we'll see, and does not need slaughtering later. But now this animal is a mix of that leg, the leg that was stuck out requires slaughtering. The slaughtering of the mother doesn't help for the leg. So the leg needs to be slaughtered, but the rest of the animal doesn't need to be slaughtered, and slaughtering doesn't do anything. So that leg there's no way to make that leg kosher. We ask the question, what if that animal now has a baby? So what we said yesterday was that you see the fact that the animal is a whole unit. So the fact that the animal is missing a leg, it doesn't give birth to an animal that's missing a leg. You see that the genetic material of the animal, the whole animal, comes together. So you don't say that the leg comes in a leg and the arm comes in an arm. Basically the genes are all in one place, and the genes of the animal are one thing. And so mixed up, the same place that stores the genes of the leg stores the rest of the genes. So you had to say the genes of the leg are involved in this creation of the animal. So then what exactly is our question then? So let's just start with going back a few words from what we did. Elapshita, in the Gemara, it's about five lines into the wide line, third word on the line. Pshita is obvious Meval Zari, that the seed is all mixed up, that with one central kind of DNA is coming. It's not that the leg makes a leg, it's a central DNA. However, this is the question that we have. Behema ba'alma, a regular animal, lav mikoach chelev adam ka'asya v'sharya. So every animal had a parent that was not entirely permitted. Meaning every single kosher animal has blood in it and has forbidden fats in it. So since the mother and father both had forbidden fats and forbidden blood in it, then why don't you say every single animal is forbidden because it comes from a parent comes from part of the animal that was forbidden, and he has fat DNA in it, but it's all one thing. DNA is all one unit, so part of this is coming from the fat, the fat building genes. That's all part of this animal. Everywhere you go, you have the fat building genes. So basically, why don't you say the whole animal is forbidden? Obviously, it's not. The question is, why not? And what's the difference between that and this? Really, the question is, what's the difference between that and this? The fact that this animal is coming from an animal as a forbidden leg. How is a forbidden leg different than forbidden fat? Just like the mother's forbidden fat, and that doesn't make the child forbidden. So the animal's forbidden leg. Why should that make the child forbidden? What's the difference here? Maybe it doesn't. So Hachanami here also Loshna should be not be different. Or Dilmar maybe Trey Yisur Amrinin. Two prohibitions that we say are okay, but plus the low Amrinin. The third one that we say no, you can't. That's not that as a parent having this prohibition, that's not allowed. It says Ulaman, and according to which rabbi are we asking this question? Either Rabbi Meir, if you're talking about an opinion of Rabbi Meir, as we'll see shortly, it's a chelev adam ika. And he says this Ben Bekua, this child that was born, just a regular case of a child that was born after the mother was slaughtered. Then there's a prohibition on the fat is considered fat, the blood is considered fat. However, he doesn't hold with this leniency. He holds it needs to be slaughtered. Therefore, Yotze Leka does not have the prohibition of leaving, because you say this animal is independently alive, not part of them. The fact that it's alive, it needs its own slaughtering. So the fact that the leg came out, it doesn't make any difference, because the animal anyway needs its own slaughtering. So Rabbi Meir holds, right, if the animal's inside its mother, it makes no difference, you have to slaughter it later. So he holds that the fat and the blood is forbidden, but you have to also slaughter the baby. So the fact the leg was stuck out makes no difference. It's not that doesn't make it prohibited. This leg is not the leg is not impossible to eat. There's no prohibition on this leg. Either Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yehuda is a Yotze Ika. There is a prohibition on the leg, because he said this animal does not need to be slaughtered. and therefore can't be slaughtered. Therefore, this leg that left and the slaughtering of the mother doesn't help. This leg is permanently prohibited. According to Rabbi Yehuda, there's no prohibition on the fat or the blood. At least no prohibition on the fat, for sure. The Tana, and it says in the Mishnah, noeg. They take out the word giranasha. Noeg b'shlil. The mitzvah of Talmud giranasha. Just in the Mishnah doesn't say giranasha. The giranasha, if you had noeg b'shlil, applies to a miscarriage. That if you have it's basically a baby that was in the mother when the mother was slaughtered, but is not fully formed. Nevertheless, you have to take out the sciatic nerve from that baby. The chalba aser, and its fat is aser. Divrei Rabbi Meir, according to Rabbi Meir, who holds that this animal is considered independent, even though it was inside the mother when the mother was slaughtered. But the forbidden parts of this animal, the giranasha, the fats are forbidden. Rabbi Yehuda says the prohibition of the sciatic nerve does not apply to the fetus. The chalba mutter, and fat is considered to be permitted. So at what stage are we saying that what are we worried about? What are we worried about this leg being apparent? If this leg is apparent, what difference does it make? According to the opinion says the baby is permitted, then we're not worried about the fat being permitted. So why are we worried about the problem of the leg? Ella rather kol mikoach lo amrina. You don't say it comes from that it comes from the fats. It comes from this. So lo amrina. Sorry, lo amrina shari. So you don't say. Right. So you don't. So the fact that it comes the fact that it comes from a fat. The fat comes in the leg is not a problem. So back to the question is, what exactly is our question? This is our question. What about drinking the milk of this animal? That's really our question. So we're not worried. If the animal has a leg that's forbidden, that's not going to be a problem with the baby. So what is the potential problem? Let's say this is a female animal. And so normal animal, in general, you can't eat it while it's alive. The Torah says you're allowed to eat milk, even though the mother is alive. Even though in general you're not allowed to eat part of a living animal, something called aver minachai, a limb of a living animal is prohibited, but milk is okay. Why is milk okay? That's basically part of our question. Is milk okay because the Torah says milk is okay? In which case, this animal, even though the leg is considered to be unslaughterable, nevertheless, the milk is okay. Or maybe you'll say no, that the milk is okay because the mother has the potentiality to become permitted to eat. The mother is not non-kosher because you could always slaughter the mother and eat the mother. So even though you haven't slaughtered the mother, so right now the mother is, for practical purposes, the mother is prohibited, but the mother is not inherently prohibited. It just happens to be you haven't slaughtered it, so it's prohibited. But you could always slaughter the mother and eat the mother, and therefore the milk is permitted. But if the leg of the mother is prohibited, then the milk is going to be prohibited because it's coming from the leg. The leg is part of the mother. Since the leg is part of that mother, then part of the milk is coming from that leg, and therefore the milk is going to be prohibited. Let's read that inside. So malig mois chalbo. So what about drinking the milk? Chalav de alma, milk in general, lok ever menachai dami b'shari, is not considered to be a living animal and permitted. Hi nami losha. So this milk of this animal that was born, right, it sucked its leg and then the mother was slaughtered and then it was born. Or Dilmar, perhaps Hasam in that case, islay tekantali sur b'shchita. There's a way to remove the prohibition of the mother by slaughtering it. So the mother has a potentiality to become permitted, and that's why the milk is permitted. Hacha, but here in our case, when the leg came out before the mother was slaughtered, or the grandmother was slaughtered, the mother of the milking cow was slaughtered. Hacha, here, there's no way to fix up this leg by slaughtering it, and therefore the milk of this baby might be permanently prohibited because it came from a leg that there's no way to permit, and therefore this milk might be permitted also. It's called the milk. You could call it the milk of a non-kosher animal, and since it could be considered the milk of a non-kosher animal, then it would not be allowed to. You're not be allowed to drink it.
You're assuming the milk could be coming from the leg.
The milk is coming from the animal.
Right.
The animal has a leg that's prohibited.
Right.
The leg is part of the animal.
Okay.
So the principle is a yotze min tame tame. Anything that comes from a non-kosher animal is not kosher.
Okay.
So the question is, the fact the leg is not kosher, is that enough to affect the milk? You say the milk is coming from a non-kosher animal. Because this animal is, 88% kosher, but it's 12% not kosher. So even though the milk glands are not in the leg, nevertheless, it's coming from an animal that's partially not kosher. On the other hand, every living animal is not kosher. So why is this animal not kosher? There's nothing inherently not kosher about it. It's not kosher because it's not slaughtered. It's not kosher because it can never be slaughtered. So a regular animal that's alive is not kosher because it hasn't been slaughtered. And this leg is not kosher because it hasn't been slaughtered. So you can say there's no difference here. Just like a regular animal is alive and you can't eat the regular animal that's alive, the milk is permitted. So too, you can't eat this leg while the animal is alive, and therefore the milk is permitted. On the other hand, a regular animal, even though right now you can't eat it, you could always slaughter and then eventually eat it. So we don't say this animal is in the category prohibited because it could at some point change status and be permitted. So you don't say it's coming from a treif animal because the animal isn't going to stay prohibited because you could slaughter and eat it. So it's not called, it doesn't have a label of treif since you could slaughter it. But this animal, that leg is labeled as treif. There's no way you could ever slaughter it. So we're going to apply a name of treif on the leg, and therefore you say this milk is coming from an animal that's partially treif, and therefore the milk is going to be prohibited. According to that side of the question. And then once it's take it or leave it, it's an open question. We don't know the answer. Can you drink the milk of this animal that was stuck out its leg, slaughter the mother, and then the animal was born? So we don't know. So it comes up. If it comes up, if you see this, then don't drink the milk because we're not sure. It might be a Torah prohibition, and practically the milk is going to be prohibited. So you should check every time you milk. Call up milk company. Say, hey, was this animal by any chance? Let's stick out its leg. You don't have to worry about it. It's so uncommon. Okay, moving on to a new topic, related topic, but new topic. So chotek me'uber. I'm talking about you cut up the baby before it was born. The mother's having trouble giving birth, and you cut up parts of the baby, and anything inside the mother is permitted, even though it's no longer attached. If it's part of the mother, we said, cut it off the mother, then slaughtering it does not help. But when it's the baby, then it's permitted. In general, how do we know that the baby is permitted? The pasuk says, Minalan, how do we know? The verse says, any animal that has a cloven hoof, behema bivehema, an animal so let me grab a chumash because it makes more sense. You have the whole verse here. Do you have the whole verse on the side? Do you have the Torah Shalim? Is that it? Yeah. Can you read the verse? So any animal. That has cloven hooves.
It's some sayat, shayat,
and it chooses cud.
Shamash stay pratsot.
It's two separate legs. Yeah. So this is the chewing cud part. So I got mixed up. That was all that's having cloven hooves. This is saying it brings up it chews its cud. So malak gerad chews up his cud babahema. Literally, the simple way to read the pasuk is of the animal. Right? You choose his cud of the animal, so you can eat that. But it says the word babahema, the base of babahema, normally is translated in. So very often it's not translated as in. The simple way to read this verse is it's talking about, it means of the animals, of this kind of animal you can eat, an animal that chews its cud, its cloven hooves, that's what you can eat. But the way it's phrased is to use the word babahema, that could be translated inside an animal. Babahema means in an animal. Now, normally the simple way to read the verse again is of the animal, but the fact is said this way, it sounds like it's saying inside an animal. That tells us that an animal inside an animal is permitted. That's what the Gemara is saying. But Bahema, Babahema, animal in an animal, Ravas is a vlad to teach us that the baby is permitted. It says Elameata. Now they're saying that Yamirabo, you should be able to do Timura on it. So Timura is a prohibition against trying to transfer the holiness of an animal. It came up a few times in Zvachim and Nachas, right? So if I have one animal that's holy, and I say, you know what, I want to switch that to holiness. I want to make this animal holy instead. Then you say this animal instead of that one. You're not allowed to do that. And not only does it not remove the holiness, but it does make a new holiness. You end up sort of somewhat copying the holiness, and you have two holy animals. So we're saying that this animal inside an animal is considered to be part of the animal. So therefore, if you sanctify the mother, then Yamirabo, then you should be able to do Tamura on this baby. Considered to be an animal, part of the mother, and then you should be able to do Tamura on it. Alma, we see, and this is one of the biggest tongue twisters on all the Gemara. Ein memir, and you cannot do truma. Lo avarim, not limbs, ba'ubarin, on fetuses. Below ubarin, and not fetuses, ba'avarin, on limbs. Below avarin, ba'ubarin, and not limbs and fetuses, b'shleimim, on a whole animal. So fetuses we see are excluded from Tamura. Cannot copy the holiness of the fetus. Below shleimim behen, and cannot copy holiness onto a fetus. So you can't copy a limb to a fetus to a limb, a limb or a fetus to a whole animal to a fetus or a limb. It doesn't work. So it can't be the source. So if you tell me that this tells us that the fetus is considered to be an animal in an animal, then you should be able to do Tamura on it because it's an animal. And you say you can't. Ella Amakra, rather a different verse. Every animal is permitted, that's kosher, you can it. Rouses of blood to add on a child. So any animal, it says anything inside, basically. If so, if you say it's anything, Nami. Even if you cut off part of the mother, the kidney and the spleen, etc., that should be permitted by a slaughtering. Alma, we see that Tana, it says in Mishnah, you cut off from the baby inside it, that's permitted. But from the spleen, from the kidneys, is prohibited. So the verse says that any part of any animal here is permitted, and therefore that's why the baby is permitted. That should also permit the spleen and the kidneys if they got cut off. So that doesn't work either. So Amakra, the verse says, no, osa, it you can eat. Shlema, whole, v'lo chasera, but not partial. Elamiyata, but based on what you're saying, if that's really the source, shochin is behema, you slaughter an animal, umatzah b'devus yona tishtri, and have found a dove inside it, or it looks like a dove inside it. That should be permitted. Alma, we see Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yehuda, shochin is behema, someone slaughters the animal, matzah b'devus yona, and found in it a dove, aser b'chila, it's prohibited to eat. So if you say anything inside an animal is permitted, then why is the dove permitted?
But anything inside an animal is permitted.
Permitted. So he said anything is permitted. We said if it's part of the animal, then it has to be whole. So if it's cut up, then that's not okay. The animal itself is cut up, it's not okay. So inside the animal looks like a dove. Why is that prohibited? Well, the answer is no. Be'ina parsas. It has to have legs. It has to have cloven hoofs. So just like the baby inside it has to be an animal, the animal has to be kosher. And this one doesn't have cloven hooves. That's why the dove inside is not permitted. As El Miata, based on that, kalut, an animal that doesn't have cloven hooves, b'mei para, inside the cow. We talked about this yesterday. Litzar, it should be prohibited. Hatana Rabbi Yishmael, the Rabbi Yishmael taught. This teaching of the school of Rabbi Yishmael, Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, is like according to the opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. Now, Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai came after Rabbi Yishmael, saying that this reasoning of Rabbi Yishmael is in line with the reasoning that Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai said a couple generations later. The verse says, "Parsa b'behema tochelu." has to have a leg in an animal to eat. And therefore, Rabbi Shimon actually says it's prohibited. No, sorry. Rabbi Shimon agrees. Sorry, I said it wrong. Rabbi Shimon, even though Rabbi Shimon says the animal is born having not kosher hooves, it's not kosher. Rabbi Shimon agreed that before the animal was born, then not having cloven hooves is not a problem. So why the answer is we have a verse that says that parts of behema, a foot in the animal, tuchelu, you can eat it. That teaches us that we saw this yesterday. That if the requirement to have cloven hooves does not apply before the animal is born. So back to the question: how do we know an animal is permitted then? So Shimon Bar Ashi Omar says, go back to the original verse, the animal in an animal is permitted. Kakashach, I had a question in Mamirin. Why can't you do Tumura on it? Hamani, who's taught this? Rabbi Shimon, the coin opinion of Rabbi Shimon. To Makish Tumura Lamaiser. They compare Tumura, the copying, a Meiser to the tithe. Ma Meiser ain't a noeg by Varim. Just like there's no tithing on limbs, you can't say the leg of this is Meiser. Because the way you make mice, you have the animal, put the animals in the pen, the baby animals in the pen, count them one at a time, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 that comes out, you mark it and say this is meiser. 11, 12, start again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, next one, 10 is meiser. Can't make a limb meiser. So we learn out Tumura from meiser, just like meiser, you don't have a limb, so to Tumura cannot be done with a limb. And same thing, Vubarim, can't do it with a fetus, because a fetus can't walk, right? Fetuses don't walk. Mm-hmm. So if the fetus walks through, maybe you could, but fetus can't ever walk. So there's no mice on a fetus. So too, Tamura cannot apply to a limb and to a fetus. And how do I know that? That mice doesn't apply to a fetus or a limb. The Tanna says in the Mishnah, Yossi says, but how low? And isn't it true? The Mukdash, when it comes to sanctified animals, if someone says the foot of this animal is an ola, the whole thing's an ola. And so too, when you sanctify the foot of we say the foot of this animal as the animal, then it should work, and that whole animal should be sanctified. So Yossi says you can do it. Someone asks, trying to prove a point here. So Laman, according to whom? Who's Rabbi Yossi talking to? Yossi is trying to prove something. Yossi is trying to prove, just like when you sanctify a foot, the whole animal becomes holy. So too, when you say, I want to copy the holiness onto the foot, then the whole animal should become holy. Who's he responding to? If he's talking to Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yehuda, do they hold this basic common ground that sounds like he's starting from, that if you sanctify a leg, the whole animal's sanctified? They don't hold like that. When he says, just like when you sanctify a leg, the whole animal's holy, so when you copy the holiness onto a leg, the whole animal's kosher. The whole animal is holy. If the rabbi he's talking to doesn't say if you sanctify the leg, the whole animal is holy, then his proof is the because they don't hold that the whole leg is holy. Mislu Aisvara, they hold that if you sanctify a leg, the whole animal is holy. But Tanya, it says in the Brisa, Yachol, you might think, or someone who says, Raglish is Ola, the foot of this animal is an Ola, Tekula Ola, the whole animal is an Ola. The verse says, Kol asher yitain mimenu Hashem, if you give of it to Hashem, will be sanctified, mimenu kodesh, whatever part you sanctify is sanctified. V'lo kulo kodesh, but the whole thing does not become sanctified. And so, Yachol teisei l'cholin, you might think that leg itself is not sanctified at all. You should go back to being, that you should be able to redeem it and make it go back to being unconsecrated and eat the animal without being a sacrifice. Talmud verse says, yeah, it should be, it should stay whatever it is. So the whole animal does not become holy. But whatever you sanctify does become holy. And it has to be it's holy forever. There's no way to redeem it unless it develops a blemish. Haketz, what are you supposed to do? Then the leg is an ola. Can't offer a leg as an ola, though. Can't redeem it, but you can't offer it. So what are you supposed to do? Timache, you should sell it. Olas. You sell it to someone who needs to bring an ola. The man Chulin, and its value is non-consecrated, chutzun ve'ever, except for that one limb. So let's say an animal is worth $200, and after that leg part of the animal is worth $25. So you sell the animal for $200, pocket $175, and the $25 is going to be consecrated as to be used for a sacrifice. Because since you already sanctified the leg, you can't sell what you don't own. That leg belongs to the base of Mikdash. So when you sell the animal, you sell it for $200, you're selling your share for $125, and the base of Mikdash is selling its share for $25. And so that $25 is sanctified, and you pocket the $175 for your animal. Give it Rabbi Yehuda. This is the kind of Rabbi Yehuda who holds when he sanctified the leg, animal is not kosher, it's sanctified. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon Omrim. Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon say, Minayin, how do you know the Omer Ragel Shazu Ola? Someone says the foot of this animal is an Ola, Tehekula Ola. The whole thing does become an Ola. Tamaloma, the verse says, yeah, it should be. Rabbi says Kula. From there they learn that the whole thing is holy. Anything you sanctify from it will be holy. That means the whole thing's holy. So now we're going back to the original point we're making. Rabbi Yossi said, just like when you sanctify the leg, the whole thing's holy. So too, when you copy the holiness onto the leg, the whole thing's holy. The whole thing, right. So who's he talking to? Either Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yehuda. Do they hold that you sanctify the leg is holy? They don't. They can't be talking to them. Allah Rabbi Shimon. Isn't he talking to Rabbi Shimon? You see in Rabbi Shimon, you sanctify the leg, the whole thing is holy, but if you copy the holiness onto the leg, the whole thing's not holy. He says, no, that's not true. Yosei time and enough shekamim. Yosei is just explaining his own reasoning. He's not talking to anybody. He's just proving his point. He's saying just like when he's saying the leg, it's holy. So too, you can copy the holiness onto a leg, and that will work, and the whole thing is going to be holy. And therefore, you don't have any proof that Rabbi Shimon holds differently. And therefore, you don't know. Therefore, you don't have a proof that our mission is Rabbi Shimon. Right. So we're back. So I think it sounds like we're leaving the question. We don't know who the Tana of our mission is.
So if you copy part of it,
according to Rabbi Yossi, copying part of it will work. Right. According to Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, copying part of it will not work. So this Mishnah that we quoted before, we don't know is Rabbi Shimon. And this is not a proof. I guess yeah. Well, that's what we wanted to say that only Rabbi Shimon holds you can't do Tamura, but everybody else says you can do Tamura. You're saying no, it's not true. You don't necessarily know that. But it doesn't mean it's not true, it just means we don't necessarily know that. Okay. Next Mishnah. Hamavakeris, give an animal that's giving birth for the first time, has never given birth before. Hamakasha lele, that's having trouble, difficulty giving birth. Then Mahatich aver leklavim. You can cut up one limb at a time from the baby and throw it to animals to eat, because the holiness only happens when the animal is born. So as the animal comes out, you can just cut it up bit by bit as it comes out until the animal is born. It's not holy. And as we said in the Mishnah, the last Mishnah, till either the majority of the animal comes out or the head comes out, the animal is not considered born. So whatever does come out, you can cut it up, make it easier for the animal to come out, so you don't lose the mother, and just throw it to dogs to eat. Does not have holiness. If a yatsa ruba, but if the majority came out, then raise the cover. You have to bury it with the holiness of a firstborn. If teres ben mechon, either way, it is exempt from firstborn, and the animal after that will not be. The animal will not be obligated in firstborn after that. But what we're saying is that until the animal comes out, it doesn't have holiness, and therefore you can cut it up and feed it to dogs. So Itmar, they had a discussion. Yatze shlish, 1/3 of the animal came out. He sold it to a non-Jew. The rule is if a non-Jew owns an animal, it's not obligated in the firstborn. So 1/3 of the animal came out. That animal was born in the possession of a Jew. That 1/3 is born was owned by a Jew. So at that moment, it was subject to the mitzvah of Bechor. But then he sold to a non-Jew before the rest of it came out. And the next third came out. Rabbi Yehuda says, Kaddish, it is sanctified, because you had a majority of the animals now come out, and now it's sanctified. Rav says, Eino Kaddish, it's not sanctified. They can explain why, they explain themselves. Yehuda Omer Kaddish, Yehuda says it's sanctified, because it says, L'mafreya Kaddish, that it is sanctified retroactively, meaning, when the majority of the animal comes out, that tells us the entirety of the animal is holy. Because you don't have the majority coming out in 1 second. So clearly, it adds up. When we have part of the animal, at some point the majority has come out, we say the majority has come out, that shows us in the first place, this whole animal was sanctified from the moment it started coming out, even. Just you need that, it's a condition that eventually the majority comes out. Once the majority comes out, you say it's holy the whole time, and therefore this animal is the firstborn, and you cannot have sold 1/3 of it to a non-Jew. Non-Jew will get a refund, and it's sanctified. Came in the Nafik Ruba, since the majority came out, Igle Milsa revealed, the man is revealed to us, and Mafreya retroactively Mikara Havakadish. It was holy the whole time. Might have Zavin, whenever you sold, Lav Klum Zavin. You didn't sell anything because it wasn't yours, it was sanctified. Rabba says, Eino Kaddish, it is not holy. Why? In the case of when 1/3 came out, you sold to a non-Jew, and then the rest came out. He said, behold, it's only sanctified from now onward. Madazavin, whatever you sanctified, Shabar Zavin, you sold, and therefore it's no longer there to combine. Just like when you chopped it off, it's not there to combine. So too, if you sold it to a non-Jew, it's not there to combine to make the animal holy. And they're following their own reason, they said elsewhere. They following their own reason, they said elsewhere. Because it was said, Yatze Shlish, Derek Tofin, you had an animal that was born, 1/3 of it was born by cesarean. Mishnei Shlish, Derek Rechem, and 2/3 came out in the normal way. Now, I'm not sure how this is exactly possible. Simply, probably that, you started your cesarean, took out 1/3, and then the animal just slipped through and was born the natural way. The whole thing ended up coming out the natural way, but that first third came out through the cesarean before the rest of it came out. So that it was labeled cesarean. That he started cesarean and then it ended up cutting all the way through it. It was able to slip down, came out the normal way.
But that part is not Bechor.
So the birth of 1/3 of the animal is not subject to Bechor. 2/3 of the animal is subject to Bechor. So how do you view this animal? Rav Yehuda says, Eino Kaddish, it is not sanctified. Rabbi Amar Kaddish, Rabbi says it is sanctified as Bechor. I have to explain themselves. Rav Amar Eino Kaddish, Yehuda says not Kaddish. Rav Yehuda follows his own reasoning in this case. And the Freya Kaddish, it goes retroactively. Ruba Kama Lesi Berechem. And the first majority was not majority based on meaning 1/3 was cesarean. The next, slightly more than a sixth came out. At that point, it is now born. And since at that point it's born, and the majority of what has come out was not born in the normal way, this animal is not going to be sanctified. That's the moment the sanctification should happen. At that point, it's not going to be sanctified since the majority of what has come out came through a cesarean. It's not going to be sanctified. Rabba Amar Kaddish, Rabba says it is sanctified. Rabba Tanei, Rabba follows his own reasoning as well. Amar says Mekanal Haba Kaddish, it's only sanctified from now onward. For Ruba and the majority of this animal, Derek Rechem Nafik, came out from the normal way, and therefore it is sanctified. Since the majority came out the normal way, then that's only at that point it's said to be born. for this halacha anyway, and therefore it is sanctified. But even though these two opinions line up, nevertheless, they're not necessarily inherently tied together. Meaning one falls from the other, but you could have split the difference. That's why we need to make both of these statements. It's not redundant to say these, even though these two things fit together. Nevertheless, it's not redundant. We need to hear both statements. Why? Because you only heard this case. This case being the first one, our case of the of selling it, where it's a leniency. In that case, Rav Yehuda said that it is sanctified. So Rav Yehuda said it is sanctified. Because to say it's not sanctified would be lenient. In this case, of Huna is the one that says it's sanctified. So to say that it's not sanctified would be lenient. He doesn't want to be lenient here. In the other case, when the animal came out through cesarean, that to say that it's retroactively born would be lenient. The chumra that he's avoiding the stringency. Even more like the Rabbah, maybe he'd admit to Rabbah that you should be stringent in that case. That to say that you view it from now on is more stringent, maybe he'd agree with Rabbah that you should be stringent. Maybe he would want to say stringent on both sides. And that's why we had to say that he follows the opinion that say that if it's born, then that's considered to be retroactively sanctified, both for lenient and for stringent. That's why I need to mention both cases of Rav Huna. The Imar Bahan, who said the other case, if you only said the case of the animal coming through the cesarean partially, then Rav Huna, once you know Rav Huna says in that case, it is not sanctified, and for sure you know Rav Huna is going to say in the case of selling it is for sure it is sanctified. Why didn't you say the first case then? The Itmar Bahavi only said the case of the animal being coming through cesarean, and mine thought Bahak Amar Rabbah. That's what Rabbah says it is sanctified because that is a stringency. But maybe in the case of selling it, where it's lenient to say the animal is not yet born, then maybe he would agree with Rabbah that it's prohibited. He agree with Rav Huna that's prohibited. Do you follow that? Okay. Basically, you have two cases here. In one case, the animal was 1/3 born, and at that point, it was owned by a Jew. Then you sold to a non-Jew. If you say what matters was the moment it came out of the mother, that 1/3 came out of the mother and it stayed that's subject to the firstborn. When the next third comes out, you now have a majority of the animals, or next 6 came out, plus a little bit, was born. You have a majority of the animal came out in a way that was subject to firstborn, and the animal's the firstborn. But if you only look at it at the moment the majority has come out, by the time the majority has come out, you've already sold this. This third is not relevant to the firstborn anymore because it's owned by a non-Jew. Therefore, it's not going to be sanctified. To say you look retroactively in this case is a stringency. Say you don't look retroactively is a leniency. Right? To say that what matters was the moment it came out, that's a stringency that's going to tell you it is sanctified since before, when it came out, it was not yet sold to a non-Jew. So it would be stringent to say you look back at the beginning of the moment it came out, not the status. You don't look at the status when the majority came out. You look at the way it came out originally. That would be more stringent. So you don't look at it with more lenient. On the other case, the animal was born partially through, the first third was born through cesarean. To say that matters, the way it came out at that moment, even though the majority was born naturally, but if you say the first majority is what matters, then that would be more lenient because you're going to combine the part that was born cesarean to make the whole thing permitted. And to say you don't say that would be more stringent. So these rabbis, one rabbi says in both cases it's permitted, one rabbi says in both cases it's prohibited. One says, why do you need to mention both cases if it's the same opinion? So no, because you could have thought whichever rabbi says lenient in that case, hadn't mentioned that case, you would have thought that he only says his ruling to be stringent, but he doesn't. But when a case said that his ruling would make it lenient, he wouldn't be willing to go on a limb and say that to be lenient. So in the first case, Rabbah said it's permitted. If we hadn't mentioned the first case, I would have thought Rabbah agrees to Rav Huna that's prohibited in that case. It's only going to make, just like Rabbah says it's prohibited in the second case, you might have thought Rabbah would say it's prohibited in the first case as well. If it only told the first case where Rav Huna says it's prohibited, and hadn't told the second case, you might have thought just like Rav Huna says it's prohibited in the first case, he'd agree with Rabbah it's prohibited in the second case as well, and there'd be no argument in the second case. That's why I have to say both cases tells that in both cases that each side stick to their guns, and with one that says it's called born already, holds it's called born already, whether it's lenient or stringent. One says not born already, holds it's not born already, whether it's lenient or stringent. You have a couple minutes though. So they're both necessary. Tanan, it says in our Mishnah, a animal have never given birth yet is having trouble giving birth. Cut off one limb at a time, and throw it to the dogs. What's the case? Aren't we talking about the case when you cut them off and you set it aside? Which means at some point you have a majority animal sitting there, and that should now be sanctified. If you say that it adds up, eventually it should retroactively be sanctified. And yet you see it's not. I'm afraid you say it's retroactively sanctified. You cover me boile, then you should have to bury it since they're all sitting there. Now the majority has come out. You should have to bury it. There's loan. That's not the case we're talking about. This is the case we're talking about. That you cut off a limb, threw it to the dog. The dog ate it up. So each limb that came out got eaten. It's not around still to combine. It's not around still to throw to a dog to bury. I mean, it's not there to bury. At the time the dog ate it, it was permitted. Now, eventually, retroactively, it was sanctified. But at that point, it's too late to treat it as holiness. It's gone. But if you would cut it off and set it aside, what would the halacha be? Yikav, you'd have to bury it. Tana safe, instead of teaching the end, Yatza Rubo, when the majority came out, Yikav, you bury it. If time in Bechor, and it's exempt from firstborn. Why don't we distinguish in this first case when you cut it up before the majority came out? But when do we say it's permitted? When you cut it immediately, throw it to a dog. Each limb one at a time. But if you cut it out, cut it off and set it aside, eventually the majority came out, you have to bury it. So that is what it's saying. But when is it true that you can throw it to a dog? Throw it to a dog. But if you cut it off and set it aside, not the kamishi yatsa rubo, just if the majority came out, you cover and you have to bury it, meaning you're right. It's only Mishnah says cut off a limb, throw it to a dog, and anything other than that, it's called majority was born and it's prohibited. So you don't have a proof here.
You bury the dog.
You have to bury the dog. Once it's gone, it's gone. So the boy Rava asked the question: does a limb go by the majority or not? Taking on what's the case we're talking about? If you say we're talking about rove, majority of the animal came out, but only was halfway through a limb. So the moment you had the majority animal out, 50%, 51% of the animals out, the arm was 2/3 inside. So part of this arm was inside the animal when the majority of the animal came out. If that's the case, we ask the question, high mute to bride, the part that's outside, Basar Rov to Eva Shinin, do we say it's considered connected part of the limb that's inside? Or Basar Rov to Uber of Shinin? And when you say goes by the majority of the animal, Pshit is obvious to Loshav Kina Ruba to Uber. You don't ignore the majority of the animal, Bazin Basar Rov Aver, and say it goes by the limb. If the majority of the animal is born, the fact that most of the limb is inside is not going to help you. This animal is born, the whole thing's prohibited. So that can't be our question. What is the question? I guess we'll have to come back tomorrow and see what the actual question is then. Where does it matter whether you say a limb can be born halfway or not? That the limb is more, that we say that part of the limb follows the rest of the limb. Not in this case when the majority of the animal came out already, then for sure the animal was born. We're looking for a case tomorrow where we're saying a limb is half born Do we say the limb is the status of the whole animal? Where is that question relevant? To be continued.
Yashkov.